This week on the WriterCon podcast.
What I always tell authors that I meet at conferences, and I go to a lot and meet a lot of new and aspiring authors, is don't stop on that first book. I did not get published until the third book I wrote. And I'm sure you've had many authors on here who've said the same thing.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Laura Bernhardt, award-winning author of the Wantland Files book series.
Hey there, writers. I'm back again with our sound engineer, Jesse Ulrich, and my co-host, Laura Bernhardt. We're coming back after a brief post-WriterCon break. We get a few weeks off, right? But something exciting happened during that post-WriterCon break. My new book was released. Let me tell you how this book came about. Basically, this is my attempt to do the Marvel Cinematic Universe in book form, or so my son Ralph says. This was his idea. He said, "Dad, you should combine all your series characters in one big team-up Avengers thing." That was too complicated, but I could see a book with both Ben Kincaid and the more recent fictional attorney Daniel Pike getting together and trying to make a book. So that's where Partners in Crime came from. Laura, I would ask you what you thought of it, but I feel some people might feel there was some bias or influence here. But Jesse hasn't read it. So.
I have. Well, here's the thing. You did tease it in your last Daniel Pike book, which I did edit that audiobook. And so you did the Samuel Jackson end of Iron Man thing where he's like, "Have you heard the Avengers Initiative?" That's literally how your book ends, where he shows up at the end. I was like, well, now I want to see their adventure together. So
well, you were paying attention. Cool.
Yeah.
But
well,
anyway.
I loved it. It's excellent. But our listeners might not think that I am unbiased, and Amazon definitely doesn't. Amazon refuses to let me review it. So,
Yeah. Amazon is doing weird things with reviews that I don't even begin to believe. But anyway, Partners in Crime, now on sale. The 7th Daniel Pike book and the 20th Ben Kincaid book. We are joined today by a brother-sister team of writers, which I think is a first. When this first came before me, I thought, well, this must be a husband-wife team like Laura and me. But no. Boyd and Beth Morrison are a brother and sister team who have a new novel out called The Last True Templar. Now, Boyd has written before. He's a best-selling author, but Beth is along because apparently she specializes in 14th century research. We're going to hear this is a Templar novel that's actually set during the Templar era, apparently. So we're going to hear all about that and how they combine their talents to create this unique book. But first, the news. Okay, then, news story number one. We told you this was going to happen. Not that it really required Nostradamus at this point, but indeed, just as we suggested was about to happen 3 or 4 weeks ago on the podcast, the Federal Trade Commission and 17 state attorneys general have filed this huge antitrust lawsuit against Amazon on Tuesday, alleging that basically the company used its great market power to squeeze merchants and thwart rivals, resulting in higher prices, which is what antitrust legislation is supposed to present. What I think surprised a lot of people, though, was that the lawsuit is really taking a different tack than what some people suggested. They're not saying that Amazon is so huge they have to be broken up. They're instead focusing on a more narrow area of monopoly law, which is basically prices and price fixing. And they're saying that the fees and the requirements and all the incentives let Amazon collect $1 out of $2 a seller makes. In other words, it's a 50% Amazon tax, which is pretty high. Of course, you're probably thinking, well, sell someone else. But, you know, Amazon is the #1 retailer in America. by a huge margin. So I don't think they're going to go away absent some kind of government intervention. One thing that surprised me, Laura, you'll be able to relate to this, is the focus on the price on Amazon, because as anybody who's ever published or been published knows, Amazon has bots that are always actively looking for your product on other sellers' sites. And if they see a price that's better than your price on Amazon, they will, on their own initiative, lower the price to match or beat whatever they've seen elsewhere. And thus, Amazon guarantees that they've always got the lowest price on whatever your product is. I mean, that's how it works, isn't it, Laura?
Yes, but at the same time, I think most authors still have a love-hate relationship with Amazon. Right. We acknowledge that most of our books sell through that platform, right. And yet, very similar to what you're describing, we have some frustrations with needing to pay for ads to Amazon in order for Amazon to showcase those books. The whole pay-to-play business model
really
has really started irritating people. So they lure you in by telling you, but we take a smaller amount of the purchase price, guaranteeing you, as the author, higher royalties than you would get elsewhere. And yet, then when you have to go pay for all of these ads through them, are you really making more? But most of your sales are there. It's a difficult situation to maneuver through.
Right. Well, it's not just Amazon. Big tech is dominant today. Jesse, you know more about this than I do. There's also been an action against Google. You think the FTC can take down Amazon?
Well, I have one thing I would like to say to this news, which is... You all heard it good. Yes. So, like writers, I have a love-hate relationship with both Google and Amazon. They do great things for my life. On the other hand, that doesn't mean they get to break the law and control something because they were able to charge people less for a long enough time that they ran all their competitors out of business and then raise prices. Like there are some things you shouldn't be allowed to do in a open capitalistic society. So I'm happy about this. Like, I don't want Amazon to go away. I just want some controls.
Want some changes. That's exactly how I feel. I'd like to see some changes.
Well, and particularly in light of all the talk that's going on right now about AI, and nobody knows how anybody's going to react to that. I did notice, Large, you see this? Amazon KDP is now limiting how many books you can upload a day. I mean, I don't know who's uploading more than 3 books a day anyway, but is that to stop people from uploading AI-generated books?
I think so. I think that's in response to complaints that AI-generated books are flooding KU, and that means that it's watering down. It's making the page, the pay per page, less. And so authors who are actually putting their time and effort into creatively writing their own books are now suffering the consequences of KU being flooded with AI-generated books. Right. I think it is.
Go ahead. Every year at WriterCon, we have people who talk about ghostwriting, and I'm always surprised by how potentially lucrative ghostwriting can be. But that's ghostwriting by writers.
Yes.
Yeah, by human ghosts, not AI ghosts. So.
Right.
Still putting in the time and the effort to create something from nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, one more story. This is closer to home. A Texas judge has officially blocked the Texas book rating law. This relates back to a story we covered on a previous podcast too, but just to refresh your memory, this law would require booksellers and other vendors to rate the books they sell to public schools. Like, the bookseller is now in charge of rating the book, not based on how good they think it is, but whether there's sexual content, LGBTQ references, that sort of thing. The judge wrote, and here I'm quoting, "The government has the power to do the contextual ratings for the book itself. The government has the power to restrict the ability of its school district as to which books it may purchase. The exercise of these powers must, of course, comply with the requirements of the Constitution, but these are powers that should be exercised by the state directly. Or to put that in real people talk, they seem to not be objecting to the concept of book rating, but just saying the state should do it itself, not booksellers. Jesse, what do you think about compelling booksellers to rate books?
I don't think anybody should be rating books. I feel like just like with video games and music, it can be very subjective and can be used to make something, one, more appealing to the group they're trying to get not to do it, listen to it, or read it, etc. And I don't trust either side to be objective in how they would, rate such a book. So
why would they even pass this law? I mean, is this just passing the buck so that the heat is off them? Let someone else decide whether this is appropriate for schools?
I guess I mostly I think there's we don't want to do it. So, here you go.
Too much heat.
Yeah.
We don't want to become Florida. What were you saying, Laura?
I think this is just a dubious attempt to circumvent book banning rules that don't allow them to ban books. In my educational law class that I took when I was earning my master's degree, we went over this extensively. Not once has there been a successful attempt to ban a book as it's gone to the courts. Right. When it comes to the courts, it is inevitably struck down as unconstitutional. It violates our rights as citizens. We should be allowed to choose what we want to read. I think people need to be able to choose what they want to read, what helps them, what gives them support and comfort, what books they find that they see themselves in, that they can connect with. These are all good things. And trying to keep people from connecting with the books that help them, I just don't agree with it.
I think you're focusing on a really important point, though, because, people calling for book bans, that's something you hear from politicians, usually when they're running for office. But what does it ever result in? You're completely right when you say as soon as it goes to court, it's going to be struck down.
But at the state level, at the state level, they do it. Books do get banned at the state level. It's not until someone within the system.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's as soon as someone challenges it and it makes its way up to federal court, it will inevitably get struck down. But right now, we have more banned books than we have in decades.
True. I hope that's just because it's a campaign year, but maybe not.
I think...
Been creeping up.
Yeah. Also, eventually, the people trying to ban the books realize that banning the books isn't an effective way of actually not drawing attention to those books. So, the most effective thing to do if you don't want people reading a book is to not talk about it.
Right.
So, but also,
you're being very intelligent about that, Jesse.
Yeah.
Well, I am a history major, so
dominate politics.
It's I can't remember which Supreme Court justice was. The one who was talking about pornography and saying he knows it when he sees it.
Stewart, yeah.
Yes. The other side of that argument is that in a free society, not only do we have freedom of speech, but we also have a freedom we don't want, which is the freedom to be offended by things that are legal for other people. And we don't ever talk about it in that direction, and I feel like we need to, because it's not a freedom to not be annoyed by something. Right? We're all going to see things that we don't like. I was watching a lot of college football yesterday on Fox Sports, and I got to see a lot of political commercials that I did not like.
Yeah.
And documentaries on their streaming service that I did not want to see. But that's part of the society we live in. I was watching Fox. They were doing some synergy, and so I had to see those. Well,
I think, most of the book banning that we've seen in the past year or so has been politically motivated. If they put it in terms of age, if they just said, this book isn't appropriate for a kindergarten class, I think most people could get behind that. But when it's banning books, period, and people are clearly just saying that as a way of attacking woke culture or whatever that is. Ron DeSantis doesn't know. Or attacking...
So he doesn't.
He was asked. Or, just being anti-LGBTQ without actually saying it. That's what I think is motivating a lot of book banning more than just trying to get books out of the hands of children.
We should get the AIs to just write books that get banned, right? Let's just do that. And then we can focus their energy. Yeah, we can focus their energy on the fake authors.
I think you have stumbled upon the answer here, Jesse.
Internet, get on it.
All right, we're not going to do better than that. Jesse, cue up the music. Let's talk to the Morrisons. Beth and Boyd Morrison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's great.
So glad to be with you.
All right. So, first question. If you could offer writers one piece of advice, and I want to hear from both of you, so that would really be two pieces of advice. But anyway, one piece of advice to writers, what would it be? Boyd, you're first.
I'll let Beth go first.
Or Beth is.
Okay. I'm being a nice big brother.
The non-actual writer in this is going to give the first piece of advice, and my first piece of advice is always have a brother who's a New York Times best-selling author.
Is that helpful? I was thinking it might be.
Sometimes that's not as helpful for other people, but that's how I sort of got involved. But I guess if I actually had a piece of writing advice, it would be, sort of never give up, never surrender, because it was amazing the first time I saw a work of fiction with my name on it published, and I never thought it would happen. So, you just have to persevere. But Boyd probably has more useful advice.
Boyd?
Well, it's actually along those lines, because what I always tell authors that I meet at conferences, and I go to a lot and meet a lot of new and aspiring authors, is don't stop on that first book. I did not get published until the third book I wrote. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've had many authors on here who've said the same thing. I think Steve Berry didn't get published till his 8th book. And so one red flag I see is when authors come to a conference to pitch to agents with the same book 3 years in a row. And from a career standpoint, what I always say is if you want to be a career author and write for your living, you've got to get used to writing multiple books. Mm-hmm. And so when you have that book and you come and pitch, even if you don't sell it, write the next book. Don't try to perfect that first book, because you never know which book is going to be the one that strikes. And when I got my third book published, we went back and got deals for my first 2 books. So they wasn't wasted effort. Sure. And so don't get hung up on that first book. Keep going, and you get better too. You get more practice. You learn more about the craft. You get involved in the business, and so just keep going.
That's great advice.
All right. Well, tell us about this new book that you two have put together, The Last True Templar. What's it about?
So our series is called Tales of the Lawless Land, and The Lawless Land was the first book in the series. It's about a knight-errant who's been excommunicated in the 14th century, just after the worst of the Black Death during the 100 Years' War. And he, in book 2, The Last True Templar, he and a noble lady named Willa are traveling through Italy and come across a woman who is attacked by a band of marauders. And after they rescue her, they find out that she is in mortal danger from somebody who is after the fabled Templar treasure. And so to rescue her, they have to go on a hunt throughout Italy, following a series of puzzles that will lead them to the lost treasure.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. So I got to ask, was there ever a moment when the publisher said, you know, the 14th century isn't selling as well as it once did. Maybe could you write something else? Or
why do we pick the 14th century, Beth?
Okay.
Well, Boyd, started wanting to write a historical series. And so he turned to me, his sister, and I'm an expert in medieval art. And my specialty is actually the 14th century. So I knew that we would have plenty of material because I know that century the best. But also we felt like it would be a really interesting century to pick because, as Boyd said, there was so much happening in terms of social upheaval, political upheaval, health upheaval, and it just provided a lot of possibilities for an exciting plot line. One of the interesting things is, as Boyd said, it's set just after the Black Death, which was the worst pandemic in Europe that basically ever happened. And our first novel, The Lawless Land, came out just about a year and a half after the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic happened. And although it wasn't planned at all, it actually did help us finish up the book to understand what it was like to go through that, and became a major part of the plot.
And I will say we started the book a year and a half before COVID ever happened. And we actually went to Europe to do our research in person in England, France, and Italy a year before COVID. So it was just a weird coincidence that we were writing about a pandemic in the middle of a pandemic.
And then you lived through one. Wow, that's amazing. So this will be the first in the series. Can you kind of give us an idea?
Second in the series?
Yeah, second book. The first was The Lawless Land, and that is where our two main characters meet. And in that book, they go on the run from an evil cardinal who is after a priceless object in their possession. And so they flee on a kind of a quest throughout Europe to try to get this object to safety.
Okay, so I actually have two books that I need to add to my TBR list so I can get caught up. Got it. Okay, now that I've got this, so can you give us an idea of what's coming next? Like what's going to happen in the future of this Tales of the Lawless Land?
Well, we are at work on the third book. Because I came on board as the co-author on this project, the first two books have largely involved artworks since I'm a medieval art historian. And so for those who like the idea of art in the Middle Ages, these are perfect books for you. But it really revolves around the plot and the sense of adventure. And we're going to continue that in the third book. And Boyd, we can reveal where the third book is set, right?
Yeah, we traveled to Croatia in April, and there are some amazing medieval cities to visit there, like Dubrovnik and Split and Korčula. And so if you actually visit, you can see pretty much what the architecture of the 14th century looked like. And in fact, that's why they filmed many of the locations for Game of Thrones in Split and Dubrovnik, because it still looks very medieval.
Wow. That's, I think, really hard for us here in the US to even wrap our brains around because we're so young.
Mm-hmm. It's true, but it's really fun, I think, in the books, because both for The Lawless Land and The Last True Templar and the next book, you can really go to those sites. And we specifically picked sites where much of the 14th century art and architecture is still intact. So if you go today, or even if you look it up online, you're like, oh, I've never heard of Dubrovnik, and you look it up online, it looks like a medieval city. So you can learn a lot just by looking around. And that's one of the reasons that we sort of insisted on traveling, was because we took a lot of direct inspiration for different aspects of the plot and just general description and whatnot from going to the actual places that the book is going to occur in.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And it's a great excuse to do a trip.
Well, sure. There's that too. But what a great tie-in. Now people go and look it up. And so you're getting a little bit of actual history in there for people who probably wouldn't have known otherwise. I love it.
Yeah, and we have a few people reading the Last True Templar right now, which takes place primarily in Italy, in Siena, Florence, and Venice. And a few people have commented, oh, I've seen that. That's really cool. And so they when they're reading it, they recognize things it still exists 670 years later.
How cool is that? Okay, this book has the best lineup of endorsements on the front and back covers that I have ever seen in my life, including several friends of this podcast like Steve Barry and Lee Goldberg, who was on the previous episode. lead child on the cover. You must be feeling pretty good right now, right?
We've been very, the authors have been very generous with us. We even had dinner with Lee Goldberg last week at VoucherCon. So he's a friend, and people in the thriller genre are very giving. They want everybody to succeed. And so, it's very nice that they take the time to read the book and give us very nice endorsements. And we're very thankful that they have.
Writers are the best people on earth, in my opinion, anyway. So I think our listeners will be really interested in the collaborative nature of this. So you and your sister worked on it. You don't even live in the same cities. How did you do this?
One of the things we talked about was the fact that even though our book is set in the 14th century, we really would not have been able to do this in any other time period except our own, because as you noted, I live in Los Angeles, Boyd lives in Seattle. And so we literally talk together twice a day. I have a full-time job on top of this. So we talk every morning, either while we're walking our dogs or on my commute to work. And then I call him again at the end of the day. And that's where we do almost all of our plotting and all of that. And then I kind of hand it over to Boyd, who actually does the writing. So maybe he wants to talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah. So I actually do write each chapter. And as I'm done with each chapter, I'll send it to Beth so she can edit it. And luckily, she is not only a big fan of thriller novels, but she also has edited all of my books before we ever started working together. So she is a very good editor, and she is not afraid to give me the honest opinion about anything that's wrong, especially with all of my anachronisms I put in for the history. I would never have tried this kind of book without her, because what little I knew was because of Beth in the 14th century. And so a lot of times I just have no idea. And so I'll write something and I'll put in, they're wearing clothes. And then Beth will put in, oh, she was dressed in a kirtle with a this and a that. And I go, okay, sounds good to me.
But see, isn't that wonderful? I mean, I would never even attempt this, no matter how brilliant my idea was, because I thought, I'll have to spend 5 years just researching it to know what people had for dinner or how they told time. But you just call Beth, right?
Exactly. And she either knows or she knows the person in the world who does know. And if nobody knows, that's great for us, because we write fiction, and so we can just make it up.
A lot of people ask what the difference is between writing scholarly books, which I've done a lot, and writing fiction. And I always say it's the footnotes and the image permissions. It's much easier, because if we don't know it, I just get to make it up, and I don't get to do that in my scholarly work.
Yeah, possibly also reach a larger audience, right? Fingers crossed.
And even more, we'd like to.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Well, a lot of our listeners are writers themselves. We typically ask our guests, are you a plotter or a pantser? But I think you've kind of hinted at this already. We're talking about your writing process. How much of an outline do you craft at first? Because you mentioned already that you talk in the mornings, you start to brainstorm and outline. Can you delve into that a little deeper?
I think we are definitely on the plotter side, because we like to know where the story is going. I think for all of our books, we've known the major beats in the story and where the finale is going to be. And part of it is we have to know where we're going to go visit in our location. So we have to know what we're looking for. So we plan a lot of the book before we even go, although we still allow for a lot of serendipity when we're on location. But yeah, we definitely know what the major storylines are going to be, but it changes all the time.
Oh, sure. You give yourself some leeway there. So you talk in the morning, and then Beth goes to work, and Boyd gets to typing. And so is that kind of Boyd, what does your day look like when you're writing?
I wish I could say I have a typical day. I've listened to many of your authors, and they all sound so disciplined, and I am not like that. I write in bursts, and if I know what the scene, and that's why I need to talk to Beth, because we talk out the scene, and if I get stuck, I just call her and go, I can't figure out how to end this scene, and we'll talk it through, and then we'll get a brainstorm, and then I can write a 6 or 7 page chapter in an hour if I know what's going on. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot of the work is, mental, and not the most of the work is up here in the head. 10% of the work is actually typing on a keyboard.
You know why that's helpful though, to hear that. I hear from other people like you who say, well, I always hear people get up at 5 a.m. and write for 2 hours, or they do this or they do that. And I love to hear from the outliers, because I don't do that either. I do still have kind of my day job, but I've got to work when I can. And I find that people are very encouraged to hear that there's not simply one way. We can all find the way that works for us. As long as we are making that progress, it really doesn't matter how we're getting there. So I appreciate that.
And I feel like...
Yeah, I've written 14 books that way. So
excellent.
It's working.
It's working a little bit.
And I feel like my job often, because I do have a day job and I have all other I'm also writing scholarly books at the same time. And I have a lot of other obligations. And I feel like sometimes it helps Boyd keep on track, because I do have a series of deadlines I have to hit. And so he knows when he's going to have more time for me and when I'm going to have time to read stuff. And so that interaction, I think, helps keep those deadlines moving. Wouldn't you say, Boyd?
Yes, I need that deadline. Otherwise, the book does not happen.
That's good. All right. I'm going to get down to the nitty gritty now. You gave us your good advice earlier in the podcast, but what would be the worst piece of advice you've ever heard or been given, perhaps?
I think for me, the worst advice is when somebody tells you you have to do it this way. I've been a few writing seminars where they say, you must write every day at least 2 pages or 5 pages, or you must be an outliner. And there are no hard and fast rules in writing. Everybody has to figure out what works best for them. I know that Lee Child once said that he writes the first 200 pages off the top of his head, and then he writes the second 200 pages to justify what happened in the first 200 pages. So he has no idea what's going to happen. And then there's somebody like Jeffrey Deaver who writes a 300-page outline that is basically the book, and then he adds dialogue. And those two systems would not work for the other authors. So always take any advice you hear at a conference or in any way from writers with a grain of salt, but it's great to experiment and see what does work for you. And there's no rule for how to do this. And so don't accept when somebody says you have to do it this way. That's a big red flag for me.
I agree with
people
that.
Will continue listening to the podcast just in case somebody comes out with that one rule.
Right. It's great to hear what everybody else is doing, so you know what to try. Because unless you know what everybody is doing, you may not know different options.
I like to tell.
And so, like you said, you may feel bad if you're not doing it the way that somebody says you should be doing.
Exactly. I like to tell people, think of it as different tools that you can use, and you can try which tool, when you find the tool that works for you, you go put that in your toolbox and you hang on to it and you use it. But at WriterCon this year, we just heard Lisa Gardner talking about her writing process, and it wasn't what I'd expected. She does a little bit more on the pantser side to start with, and I wouldn't have expected that, but you can't argue with those results, can you? So I like to tell people, just keep listening, because we're gonna keep adding to that toolbox.
Well, for that matter, you've made it through, I think you said 14 books. You must have picked up some tips or survival tips or things you picked up along the way that you didn't know when you started, that you didn't know when you started. What are some of those useful tips?
Well, for me, it's having a great support system. My wife is very supportive of my career. She reads all my books before anybody else does. Not everybody has a spouse that can do that, but
I do.
she's also very positive about it. And having my sister, even before we started writing together, she was a big fan of my book. She helped me out with the editing on all of them. And so surround yourself with positive people, mm-hmm. I would say, is what's going to keep you going, because Beth knows that there are dark times too.
There's plenty of negative. We have to work hard for the positive.
Yeah, what I was going to say is
in your novel career, Beth, what would you say?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm much newer to this than Boyd, and I'm sort of not the writer. I'm more of the plotter and the editor and the adding in of the medieval stuff. But the one thing I would say basically to new people is that, when I started telling people about this project with Boyd, I'm a scholar. I'm a medieval art historian. And I got a lot of people saying, oh, what are you doing? You're already busy. This isn't going to help your career. Like, why are you spending time on this? It's commercial. It's, and so, I would say for people who are trying to do this in their evenings or trying to make it as a novelist, yeah, like Boyd said, surround yourself with positive people and don't listen to the naysayers, because I think if you have the ability to write a novel, and not everybody does, you do have to have a certain amount of discipline to get it all down, and a certain amount of ability, which Boyd has spent, decades building up. So I get to rely on that. But you can build that too if you really want it. So don't let people tell you that it's stupid or it's not worth it or it's not going to work out. If you believe it and you have the discipline to make it happen. And it just makes me happy. Even when Boyd and I talk about the success of the books and whatnot, we just love working together, and we just love the writing process. We love our characters. We love going on their adventures with them. And so it's easy to keep up the energy because of those things.
That's fantastic. Hey,
that was really good. I was going to say dark chocolate, but your answers were better. Thank you for that.
Less fattening. Yeah. Beth, Boyd, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
It's been great. Thank you.
Bye. Hey, one last parting word. Please don't forget about my new novel, Partners in Crime. That's the first new Daniel Pike novel in, I think, 3 years, and my first Ben Kincaid novel in more than a decade. So it's a big deal, at least in the Bernhardt extended universe. Take a look, and please help spread the word to your reading friends, okay? You'll find links to the book in the show notes. All right? Until next time, keep writing. And remember, cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.